Today is Yom Teruah, the day of the sounding of the shofar. The shofar is a natural instrument, hollow so that breath can move through it. As my teacher, Rabbi Sheila Peltz-Weinberg says, the shofar must be naturally bent. It cannot be linear, because the process of returning to our soul is certainly not a straight line. Today we stand humbly before the source of life and bear our souls to the Almighty. The sound of the shofar is our awakening, our call to action. And this day is one that is at the same time super particularistic as we focus into our own selves, our own souls, and global as we join together in community, participating in rituals that span across the generations and around the globe. And one of the most powerful, resonant traditions we have on this sacred day is the hearing of the sound of the shofar. It's not just a tradition. We are obligated through the commandments to hear its call. The first call of the shofar is tekiyah, a call of obligation, a clear, solid cry that proclaims both God's sovereignty and our shared responsibility. You see, to be a Jew is to be obligated. We are obligated to the mitzvot, the sacred commandments, and we are also taught Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. All of Israel is responsible for one another. This teaching is the essence of communal responsibility in Jewish law. We are obligated to ensure that all Jews have their basic needs met. We're responsible for the well-being of other Jews. We're even responsible for interfering if we see a fellow Jew on the verge of sinning. This principle is a powerful foundation for a covenantal community. It's a statement of purpose. We are here for each other. We can rely on each other. We work to serve each other. We are individuals, but we are obligated to each other and to God. In a midrash, we imagine the moments around the revelation of Torah at Sinai. The Torah tells us that Moses brought forth the people to the lowermost part of Mount Sinai to meet God. But the rabbis tell us that actually, in their reading, the Israelites stood beneath Mount Sinai. God overturned the mountain above their heads and said to them, "If you accept the Torah, great, and if not, this will be your burial." It's a disturbing midrash because it positions the covenant as one of coercion, not consent. But in some regards, this dynamic can be instructive for us as we consider what it means to be a Jew in the world today. Dr. Mara Benjamin teaches, we are responsive to others and to a world we did not choose. We always stand under the mountain, positioned only to respond to the conditionality of our being and of the others who constitute our being in the world. Our freedom consists not in casting off all that binds us, but rather in recognizing that our boundedness and our agency are each parts of a great whole. The idea of Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh is a powerful one, and our shared obligation to each other has sustained us across generations. But we are not Jews in a vacuum. We are Jews in the United States of America in the year 2025, and we are obligated well beyond the boundaries of our Jewish community. We are members of civic society, our neighborhoods, and our greater community. In our secular society, we are seeing an extreme tension between individual liberty and shared responsibility. Take Florida, for example. Florida has declared that because of so-called medical freedom, they have removed vaccine mandates for school attendance. This unprecedented rollback is a false freedom, one that endangers lives, undermines decades of public health progress, and abandons our obligations to each other. We have lost sight of our responsibility to each other as a society, and the stakes in this case will actually be life and death. It does not have to be like this. Tekiyah is the first shofar call, and the second is shvarim, which is 3 broken blasts. Shvarim cries out against our fractures. Our world is cracked when we mistake selfish choices for true freedom, when leaders scapegoat the vulnerable, and when lies are sold as truth. It is a difficult time to be a student of history and sociology. As I prepared for these high holy days, I found myself turning to the words of former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. Albright was brought up in Catholicism and converted to become Episcopalian, but her parents were Jews who converted in 1941 as they escaped from the German invasion of their homeland, and 3 of Albright's grandparents were murdered in concentration camps. In 2018, she published a powerful book called Fascism, A Warning. Throughout the book, she weaves together poignant historical data and personal anecdotes informed by her own upbringing as an immigrant from Prague and her varied experience as a diplomat. Her book rings through with a truth that hit me in the heart just like the call of the shofar. She writes, "When we awaken each morning, we see around the globe what appear to be fascism's early stirrings, the discrediting of mainstream politicians, the emergence of leaders who seek to divide rather than to unite, the pursuit of political victory at all costs, and the invocation of national greatness by people who seem to possess only a warped concept of what greatness means. Most often," she says, "the signposts that should alert us are disguised. The altered constitution that passes for freedom or reform, the attacks on a free press justified by security, the dehumanization of others masked as a defense of virtue, or the hollowing out of a democratic system so that all is erased but the label." Albright's prescient words ring out to me like the warnings from our prophets of old. Fascism emerges when our shared obligation collapses, causing society to fracture and resentment to rule. In this case, we have an administration that sees the world not as a global community where nations cooperate for the greater good, but an arena where we compete for advantage on the global stage. Even so, the world is a place where people from all countries must live, and in theory should work together with our international neighbors. One thing I came to take away from her book is that it takes 2 categories of people to give fascism its power: those who give orders and those who take them. The combination of wealthy backers, a popular base, and a leader with the compulsion to dominate is what makes the movement come to life. She says what makes a movement fascist is not ideology, but willingness to do whatever is necessary, including the use of force and trampling on the rights of others, to achieve victory and command obedience. Since January, we have seen a concentration camp called Alligator Alcatraz built with pride in the state of Florida. We have learned of human beings in our nation being held or deported or disappeared without due process. A freeze was ordered to halt new civil rights cases and investigations. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and protections for certain at-risk groups, like people who are transgender, have been largely rolled back. Additionally, in a move normalizing soldiers on the streets of U.S. cities, the National Guard has been deployed to Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., and troops are expected in Memphis in the days to come. In D.C., the presenting problem was homelessness. President Trump declared homeless people had to move out immediately. And officials said they'd either send homeless people to shelters or jails, disrupting existing efforts to move homeless people into permanent housing. Our Jewish tradition has many responses to homelessness and care of the poor. In some ways, most of Jewish history is the story of a quest for home in the national sense, with the Promised Land as the focal point of a multi-generation quest through the wilderness and exile. And much of our tradition is focused on caring for the marginalized and needy. On Yom Kippur, our holiest day, we will read these verses from Isaiah. "No, this is the fast I desire, to share your bread with the hungry, to take the wretched poor into your home, when you see the naked to clothe them, and not ignore your own kin." We could even see the upcoming festival of Sukkot as an exercise of vulnerability and empathy, an annual call to action and reminder that there are people who lack safe shelter every single day of the year. With the deployment of the National Guard in Washington, D.C., seemingly as a response to homelessness, we know that people who are homeless are not more likely to be treated with dignity or to be provided with safe and sustainable housing. This administration has already showed us they prefer a concentration camp model to due process. So now, rather than activate federal funding to provide safe shelter and systemic relief for the challenges that lead to homelessness, our federal government is instead fear-mongering and manipulating a crisis to justify violating democratic processes and separation of powers. Despite so many violations, there does not seem to be a limit yet as to what this administration will be allowed to do. Entire populations are being dehumanized, and we sit idly by. It's easy to feel like our hands are tied. How much can any one of us do? Just a couple of weeks ago, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote a chilling dissent for immigration patrols in Los Angeles, where she wrote this: "We should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work at a low-wage job, rather than stand idly by while our constitutional freedoms are lost. I dissent." When arguing that every age has its own fascism, Italian writer and Holocaust survivor Primo Levi said that the critical point can be reached not just through the terror of police intimidation, but by denying and distorting information, by undermining systems of justice, by paralyzing the education system, and by spreading in a myriad subtle ways nostalgia for a world where order reigned. If you keep your eyes open, you can find each one of these elements happening today right here. Perhaps we have placed too much faith in the resilience and existence of our democratic institutions. Perhaps our eyes have become blind to the slow, gradual erosion of our democracy. Perhaps we assume that everything will work itself out, and there's a sermon somewhere about hope. But hope isn't enough. Being in relationship with people who see the world differently than we do is more confusing than ever. As Albright writes, we don't just disagree, we are astonished at the views others hold to be self-evident. We seem to be living in the same country, but different galaxies, and most of us lack the patience to explore the space between. This weakens us and does indeed make us susceptible. It doesn't take much imagination, she says, to conceive of circumstances: another major recession, a corruption scandal, racial unrest, more terror incidents, assassinations, a series of natural disasters, or an overnight plunge into an unexpected war that might cause a split too wide for our Constitution, democracy's needle and thread, to mend. Albright wrote these words in 2018, but pick any 24-hour news cycle in the last 9 months, and you can see how just the right combination of these hypotheticals can leave us feeling like we, as a nation, are dangling over the edge of the cliff of democracy. Madeleine Albright warns that fascism thrives where obligation fails. Primo Levi reminds us every age has its own fascism, not only through terror, but by eroding justice and education. Shivarim is the sound of broken obligations, of democracy under strain. It demands that we notice what is breaking. As we enter into this new year, we must have our eyes open to what is really happening. We must keep our ears open to the alarms that alert us to reality. And after Shivarim comes Teruah, 9 sharp, urgent blasts that rattle us awake. Teruah is the alarm, the sound that rouses us from complacency. Teruah insists, act now. Freedom must be defended. Lies must be exposed. The survival of our democracy and our civil society depends on it. Harry Truman said fascism did not die with Mussolini. Hitler is finished, but the seeds spread by his disordered mind have firm root in too many fanatical brains. It is easier to remove tyrants and destroy concentration camps than to kill the ideas that gave them birth. And indeed, those ideas still exist today, and we're hearing them said at a higher volume and with more societal acceptance than we ever have in my lifetime. So what can we do to survive into the future with our integrity? Ruzena Spiaglova was a widow living alone, mourning the recent death of her daughter. During the severe winter of 1942, she wrote a journal while she lived in Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. And she wrote this: "People here are sad, and everyone is taking the war with difficulty. This includes Aryans and non-Aryans, to use this rather peculiar naming into which God's creations are now divided. We wear stars, as you know, some proudly, some hide them even though you're not allowed to. We live in strange times and are viewed by some members as a less valuable race. When God enlightens our brains and we understand that we are all equal before God, it will be better." In the face of true challenge, Ruzena's journal demonstrates the capacity she had as a human being with empathy. She reflected her conviction that human beings are of equal worth simply by existing. She showed generosity of spirit. As Albright says, this caring about others and about the proposition that we are all created equal is the single most effective antidote to the self-centered moral numbness that allows fascism to thrive. It is a capacity that can be found in most people, but it is not always nurtured and is sometimes, for a period, brutally crushed. I believe we are at an inflection point in American history. There are forces here that are aiming to demolish our sense of empathy with moral numbness. There are so many things going on, so many rights being threatened, such use of power and privilege to cause pain. It's hard not to feel disenfranchised and numb. But we actually do have the capacity to focus our efforts on empathy and connectivity. It may sound trivial in the face of what we're bearing witness to, but I believe in my soul that our ability to actually care about each other and for each other is a powerful antidote in the face of rising trends towards fascism. Truah is our wake-up call. It is the alarm that rings out: care about each other, re-engage, connect, build community like it's a lifeline, because it is. After Truah finally comes Tekiah Gedolah, one long, unbroken blast stretching as far as the breath can carry. It is the sound of a covenant renewed, of possibility even in the face of fear. It takes all the breath we can hold in our bodies to sound a Tekiah Gedolah, a humbling task, a stretch of our capacity. In the Jewish tradition, we have different categories of relatedness. We have our families, our clans, and our tribes. We have the stranger who is marginalized in biblical society, like the widow and the orphan, and therefore needs protection. But there is also the neighbor. On Yom Kippur, we read from Kiddushim, a section of the Torah that handles holiness. And there we'll read, "Love your neighbor as yourself. I am Adonai." On this verse, Dr. Mara Benjamin teaches the neighbor is someone who might be generic and outside of our immediate sphere of concern. But even so, we are supposed to treat the stranger exactly like they belonged in our sphere. She says that this particular commandment implies that the generic neighbor is precisely not someone drawn near, but is regarded as equal to us nonetheless. If activating our empathy is the antidote to fascism, perhaps we enter into this year 5786 with a different kind of resolution. What if we resolve to see every human being not as a stranger, but as our neighbor? What if we genuinely consider every other human being on earth as equal before God? Throughout the generations, many Jewish philosophers and theologians have considered ways to understand God. Martin Buber famously conceived of the I-thou relationship. Buber understood two primary ways that we address existence: I-it, the attitude we might have toward an object, something separate from ourselves, and I-thou, an attitude where our relationship with the other is where we find life's meaning, purpose, and ultimately a relationship with God through our relationship with others. It is a sacred thing to witness suffering and do something about it. When we are overwhelmed with the suffering and injustice in society, we can allow that overwhelm to squash us into a state of moral numbness. But the Tekiah Gedolah calls us to make a different choice, to see no strangers, to see only neighbors, to acknowledge the suffering, turn it into a question mark, and answer the question of who we are and what our moral orientation is in this world. The long, full-bodied blast of the shofar demands our compassion. We must transform the stranger into our neighbor. We must take a long breath of determination and hold close the vision of this year, this fresh start. Tekiah Gedolah holds before us the vision of a society of care, not fear, of truth, not lies, of obligation to each other, not fascism. The sounds of the shofar are not just ancient echoes, nor are they just tradition. We are commanded to hear the sounds of the shofar because its calls are our calling. Tekiah is our call to covenant and obligation. Shavarim is the sound of fracture and warning. Truah is the alarm that will not let us sit idly by through the unraveling of democracy and the rise of cruelty. And Tekiah Gedolah is the long, defiant breath that proclaims another, better world is possible. Tekiah, Shivarim, Truah, Tekiah Gedolah. These blasts are a tool for this very hour. The shofar does not whisper timidly, it shouts. So let us hear the blasts this year as our marching orders. Let them pierce our numbness. Let them shatter our complacency. Let them rouse in us the courage of our ancestors who stood beneath the mountain, who wandered the wilderness, who rebuilt after every exile. And when we sound the Tekiah Gedolah, may it not be just one long note of ritual, but the declaration of a people who will not bow to fear, who will not let lies win, who will not abandon our neighbors. May its cry be our cry, a cry of obligation embraced, of empathy activated, of justice pursued with every breath we have. Amen.